Fox News alert. That video from the ICE agent involved in this week's shooting in Minnesota shows the threat the officer was facing. It all began with a controversial shooting in Minneapolis during an immigration enforcement operation. An ICE agent fired his weapon after a confrontation involving a vehicle, resulting in the death of a 5-year-old woman. Vice President J.D. Vance reacted to this new video on X, saying, "Many of you have been told this law enforcement officer wasn't hit by a car, wasn't being harassed, and murdered an innocent woman. The reality is that his life was endangered, and he fired in self-defense." Federal authorities stated the agent acted in self-defense, while the incident immediately sparked public scrutiny and protests. Let's remember why. Why aren't we in that city right now? Because we're a sanctuary city that purposely releases public safety threats back into the public. I just mentioned about all these cases that child sex crime, child sodomy, child rape that they release back into the community. These are people we have to go look for. That single shot did not end the operation. It triggered a far broader federal investigation that would uncover a large criminal network, multi-state raids, and corruption reaching into city government. Let me show you. Have a Murray High AM, South Minneapolis. While the city slept, unmarked federal vehicles cut their lights and rolled into position around a Murray Bone-story hotel near the interstate. In seconds, exits were locked down. Elevators were frozen between floors. Stairwells were taken by armed teams moving fast and low. Doors were breached without warning. Flashlights cut through dark hallways as agents shouted commands. Occupants were forced to the ground, hands visible, rooms cleared one by one. The operation moved upward floor by floor, leaving no blind spots behind. In less than 4 minutes, ICE, DHS, and DEA detained Hichambamwisao illegal immigrants, nearly Mochamtamwi of them Somali nationals. Luggage was pulled apart. False identities collapsed. Agents recovered Mochamhaimui Bay forged passports, stacks of prepaid phones, and envelopes of cash hidden in ceiling panels. Then the operation took a darker turn. Search teams uncovered Bamwichin firearms, including loaded pistols and assault-style rifles. In maintenance rooms and locked suitcases, they seized cocaine and fentanyl packaged for distribution, not personal use. Cash totals climbed past $1 million. What began as an immigration sweep escalated within minutes. The weapons, drugs, and cash revealed the hotel was an armed distribution hub, not a shelter. In that instant, agents realized the city was facing a major criminal threat, not an immigration case. If you believe this hotel raid exposed more than just immigration violations, tap like right now and comment, investigate. If you think this was only the beginning, by dawn, the hotel raid had already begun to speak. Phones seized from the rooms kept vibrating. Missed calls, encrypted messages, delivery schedules frozen mid-sentence. DEA analysts worked through the night, correlating numbers, locations, and names pulled from burner devices and falsified travel documents. What first appeared to be scattered trafficking activity started to align into a single structure. At the center were two names that did not fit the pattern of street crime. Khalif Nurelme, 4 years old, a Somali-born judge with a spotless public record. Hodan Ela Nur, 4 High, a licensed attorney practicing immigration and criminal law in Minneapolis. On paper, they were pillars of the community. In reality, investigators believed they were the architects. According to evidence recovered from the hotel and linked storage locations, the couple had spent nearly a decade building a covert pipeline. Somali migrants were smuggled into the United States, provided false identities, and absorbed into the network as drivers, stash house guards, and couriers. Loyalty was enforced through debt, threats, and family pressure abroad. Their positions gave them protection. Court access delayed warrants. Legal filings stalled investigations. Bribes moved quietly. Border officers, local police, even senior law enforcement figures were suspected of being compromised. Drugs flowed north from Mexico and Colombia, then spread outward from Minneapolis across state lines. FBI linked the network to at least Mabone gang-related deaths across Minneapolis, violent incidents previously treated as isolated crimes before the organization was exposed. Investigators later confirmed the corruption extended beyond law enforcement. Court filings revealed direct links to the Somali-born mayor of Minneapolis, who allegedly provided political cover, delayed enforcement responses, and benefited financially. His guilty plea would later confirm that the network's protection reached the highest levels of city government. As the picture sharpened, surveillance teams picked up movement. Tamhaimwimot at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Khalif and Hodan arrived separately, carrying minimal luggage. Newly issued passports, one-way international tickets, no public statements, no lawyers present. To federal agents, it was unmistakable. They were running. ICE and FBI units closed the terminal in sections, tracking the pair through cameras and facial recognition. At Tam Haimui by AM, before boarding could begin, agents converged. The arrest lasted high seconds. No resistance, no speeches, just cuffs snapping shut in the middle of the departure hall. With their detention, the network lost its shield. Within hours, prosecutors approved expanded warrants. Financial trails were unlocked. Names buried for years surfaced at once. What began as an immigration operation had now fully transformed into a national narcotics conspiracy. And Minneapolis was only the starting point. Comment yes if you believe this network survived because of protection from inside the system. And hit like if you want to see every name exposed. Bone, Comer 6 states, one goal. At exactly the same moment, federal warrants went live across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan. More than Moat High Chum federal agents surged into position. FBI command centers coordinated real-time feeds as ICE, DEA, and DHS teams moved as a single force. Roads were sealed, power grids were monitored. The operation unfolded with military precision. The first breach erupted in northern Minnesota. A reinforced door was blown inward. Armed lookouts attempted to scatter, but flashbangs detonated, collapsing resistance in seconds. Gunfire followed short, violent exchanges inside tight hallways. 2 suspects were shot while resisting arrest. One federal agent took a round to the shoulder and was pulled back undercover as the team advanced. Bon. Mui Tam A M Milwaukee outskirts. A converted auto shop became a battlefield. A suspect opened fire from an elevated platform. Agents returned fire, neutralizing the threat. Inside, pallets of drugs were stacked shoulder-high. Cocaine bricks stamped and sealed. Fentanyl vacuum-packed by the kilogram, ready for immediate transport. Bone. Bamui by AM, South Chicago. Simultaneous entries hit an apartment complex across 3 floors. Suspects fled through stairwells and rooftops. One fired blindly through drywall. Another attempted to dump a weapon over a balcony. Agents pinned them down, secured the building, and began methodical searches. Rifles, handguns, and cash were pulled from walls, vents, and floor compartments. By sunrise, the scale was unmistakable. Across Bamui Ba raid locations, federal teams encountered barricades, early warning alarms, and weapons staged for immediate use. 4 separate firefights erupted within the first Bamui Sao hours. 9 cartel enforcers were killed while resisting arrest. 2 federal agents were wounded but survived. The arrests mounted rapidly. By the end of day 1, Bonchumwi High suspects were taken into custody, including over High Chum Somali direct cartel operatives. Dozens more were detained for weapons, trafficking, and conspiracy charges. By the end of day 2, total arrests exceeded Saw Chum Bonmui individuals, many tied directly to interstate drug transport, armed enforcement, and money laundering cells. Seizures matched the violence. Convoys rolled out loaded with tons of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine. Safes were cracked open to reveal tens of millions of dollars in cash. Armories surfaced hundreds of firearms, magazines taped together, ammunition stacked by the crate. Digital forensics teams cloned servers on site, freezing transaction ledgers mid-update. What made the fighting more dangerous was proximity. Some targets were minutes from schools and residential neighborhoods. Drugs were stored beside children's beds. Weapons were hidden behind false panels in family homes. Every breach carried the risk of ambush or civilian casualties. By day 2, federal command confirmed it. This was not a local operation. It was a hardened interstate cartel network prepared for violence and embedded deep inside America's heartland. This was not a sweep, it was a war. Comment justice if you believe this operation was necessary, and like this video if cartel violence should never be tolerated on U.S. soil. As the smoke cleared from the 6-state sweep, investigators began reconstructing what the network had done before anyone noticed it was there. The timeline was longer and darker than expected. Financial records, encrypted ledgers, and witness testimony showed the operation had been active for nearly more years. What started as small-scale smuggling evolved into an industrial pipeline. Drugs moved north from Mexico and Colombia, crossed the border, hidden inside commercial shipments, then flowed outward from Minneapolis like blood through arteries. The volume stunned even veteran agents. Analysts conservatively estimated hundreds of tons of narcotics had entered the United States through this network. Cocaine for speed and profit, methamphetamine for control, fentanyl for devastation. Each shipment was broken down, redistributed, and pushed into cities and rural towns across the Midwest. The human cost was measurable. Emergency room data showed overdose deaths in key Minnesota counties had quadrupled over the past decade. In some neighborhoods, fentanyl-related fatalities spiked by more than 1% in just 5 years. Violent crime followed the drugs, homicides climbed, armed robberies became routine, turf disputes escalated into drive-by shootings, and executions carried out in parking lots and apartment stairwells. Every spike lined up with the network's expansion. Witnesses described how migrants brought in illegally were forced into roles almost immediately. Some drove shipments, others guarded stash houses. Many were trapped by fabricated debts, threatened with exposure, or warned that family members back home would suffer if they refused. Leaving was not an option. Cooperation was enforced through fear. The drugs did not stay in criminal circles. Fentanyl leaked into counterfeit pills sold to teenagers. Cocaine fueled gang violence and money laundering schemes. Meth kept users awake for days, hollowing out entire blocks. Social workers described neighborhoods where addiction spread faster than any public health response could follow. Behind it all was discipline. Routes were rotated every few weeks, vehicles were abandoned and replaced, communications shifted constantly. When law enforcement pressure increased in one area, shipments rerouted overnight. The network adapted faster than local agencies could track until the hotel raid cracked the system open. As federal teams mapped the damage, a pattern became impossible to ignore. The violence was not random. The overdoses were not accidental. They were predictable outcomes of a machine designed to maximize profit regardless of casualties. In internal briefings, one figure circulated quietly. Tens of thousands of lives impacted directly or indirectly by the drugs moved through this single organization. For years, the network operated in plain sight, hidden behind legal titles, community status, and institutional blind spots. Judges signed orders. Lawyers filed motions. Police patrols looked the other way. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods paid the price. By the time the scale was fully understood, there was no debate left. This was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a long-running assault on public safety, and the reckoning had only just begun. When police and officials are involved, silence becomes deadly. Comment no corruption if you believe badges should never protect criminals, and like if corruption deserves zero tolerance. Once the arrest stabilized, the investigation turned inward. What agents feared quietly during the raids was now undeniable. The network had not survived for nearly a decade through secrecy alone. It had survived because parts of the system meant to stop it had been compromised. Interrogations from mid-level operatives began to align. Names repeated. Payments matched bank records. Phone logs connected officers to vehicles that should never have passed inspection. The corruption was not theoretical. It was documented, dated, and signed. Over the next Bamui High hours, internal affairs units moved in parallel with federal prosecutors. Subpoenas were issued in silence. Lockers were searched, home safes were opened, and the list grew longer by the hour. By the end of the week, Muay Thai local police officers had been arrested. Some had taken cash to ignore traffic stops. Others provided advance notice of raids. One officer admitted to escorting vehicles he knew were carrying narcotics, clearing intersections under the guise of routine patrol. Then came the name no one expected to see on paper, a sitting police chief. Investigators alleged he had accepted regular payments to redirect manpower away from key corridors and to suppress internal complaints. Emails recovered from archived servers showed deliberate interference in investigations, complaints labeled clerical errors, and evidence quietly buried. The betrayal cut deep. Public trust collapsed almost overnight. Officers who had spent years on the street found themselves questioned by their own communities. Protests reignited, not just against enforcement, but against the realization that criminals had worn badges. The corruption did not stop at law enforcement. Financial audits uncovered municipal officials who approved suspicious contracts tied to shell companies. Immigration consultants funneled clients directly into the network. Court clerks altered filing dates. Every small favor, every quiet shortcut added another brick to the cartel's protection. In closed-door briefings, prosecutors used one word repeatedly: ecosystem. This was not a single bad actor or a handful of bribes. It was an environment where corruption could survive unnoticed, normalized through routine, and justified as pragmatism. The network paid for silence, and silence became a habit. The consequences were immediate. Entire departments were placed under federal oversight. Pending cases were reopened. Convictions tied to compromised officers were flagged for review. Careers ended in handcuffs. Reputations built over decades collapsed in days. For agents who had fought through gunfire only days earlier, this phase of the operation carried a different weight. It was easier to confront armed traffickers than to accept how deeply the damage had spread. But the exposure served a purpose. By dismantling the internal shield, investigators ensured the network could not regenerate. Routes stayed closed. Replacements failed to move. Without protection, shipments stalled and alliances fractured. The illusion of immunity was gone. What remained was accountability. Slow, methodical, and unforgiving. And for the first time in years, the system began to clean itself from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, Minneapolis began to change. The noise faded first, sirens became less frequent, helicopters disappeared from the night sky. Corners once claimed by dealers fell quiet. Not because fear vanished, but because the supply had been severed. Federal analysts confirmed what local residents were already sensing. The flow of drugs had been interrupted at its source. Within Bomwe days, overdose admissions in key Minnesota hospitals dropped by nearly 40%. Street-level seizures declined, not because enforcement slowed, but because distribution networks had collapsed. Dealers who once operated openly vanished or turned on each other. Without protection, without product, survival became uncertain. The legal fallout was relentless. Federal prosecutors filed hundreds of indictments tied directly to the network. Charges ranged from narcotics trafficking and weapons violations to racketeering, human smuggling, money laundering, and corruption. Several cases were immediately designated as high-priority national security prosecutions fast-tracked through federal courts. For Khalif Nurelmi and Hoden Elanur, the fall was absolute. Their assets were frozen within hours, properties seized, accounts drained, and cataloged. Courtrooms where Khalif once presided became places where his name was spoken only in reference to conspiracy and abuse of power. Hodan's legal credentials were suspended pending disbarment. Her professional legacy erased almost overnight. But the damage extended far beyond high names. Families came forward, parents who had lost children to overdoses, residents who had fled neighborhoods consumed by violence, migrants who described being trapped in a system they never understood until it was too late. Their stories filled transcripts, affidavits, and closed-session testimonies that painted a picture of long-term harm impossible to ignore. Federal officials acknowledged the scale openly. This operation, they said, was not a victory. It was a warning, a demonstration of how quickly organized crime could root itself inside legal institutions when oversight failed and complacency set in. The cartel had not relied on brute force alone. It relied on trust, appearances, and silence. That silence was broken. New oversight measures were announced. Joint task forces were expanded. Data sharing protocols were tightened. For the first time in years, federal and local agencies operated without internal obstruction. The gaps that once allowed the network to thrive were sealed one by one. Still, no one claimed the city was healed. Too many lives had already been lost. Too many neighborhoods had been hollowed out by addiction and fear. The scars would not fade quickly, and some would never fade at all. Yet, something fundamental had shifted. The myth of untouchability was gone. The belief that power, status, or connections could shield criminal empires from accountability had collapsed under the weight of evidence and enforcement. What began with a single gunshot had unraveled a decade-long conspiracy and forced a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. For Minneapolis and for the states caught in the network's shadow, the message was clear. The danger had been real. The cost had been staggering. And when the line was finally crossed, the response was absolute. When the final warrants were served and the last evidence trucks rolled out of Minneapolis, something unfamiliar settled over the city. Not relief, not celebration, silence. The kind that forces a reckoning. For years, danger had moved quietly through courtrooms, neighborhoods, and highways, hidden behind titles, paperwork, and routine decisions no one thought to question. What the investigation revealed was not simply a criminal network, but how close an entire system came to breaking without anyone noticing. This operation proved a hard truth. Institutions do not fail all at once. They erode, one ignored warning, one delayed file, one compromised decision at a time. The network did not rely solely on violence or secrecy. It relied on comfort, on the belief that people in authority could be trusted without scrutiny. That belief became its strongest weapon. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Corruption rarely announces itself. It wears familiarity. It hides in legal language, professional reputations, and closed meetings justified as procedure. When oversight weakens, power stops serving the public and begins protecting itself. By the time the damage becomes visible, communities are already paying the price in addiction, violence, and lives lost without headlines. This case also shattered a dangerous myth that crime exists only at the margins of society. Here, it sat behind desks, signed documents, and issued rulings. The most destructive actors were not those pulling triggers, but those opening doors, delaying consequences, and silencing questions. Law enforcement can confront armed threats. What nearly defeated this system was betrayal from within. Yet, there is another truth in what followed. Once the internal shield was removed, the network collapsed quickly. Routes failed. Payments stopped. Protection vanished. Accountability, when applied without exception, worked exactly as intended. Oversight restored momentum. Transparency became a deterrent. The system did not heal overnight, but it began to defend itself again. The warning now belongs to all of us. Justice cannot be outsourced to titles or uniforms. It depends on vigilance, on the refusal to accept silence as normal, and on the courage to question authority when facts no longer align. When citizens disengage, corruption gains room to breathe. When scrutiny fades, criminal power grows comfortable. This story does not end with arrests, it ends with responsibility. Because the next network will not look exactly like this one. It never does. But the conditions that allow it to grow are always the same. If you believe no badge, robe, or position should ever place someone above the law, comment never again. If you believe accountability is the only line that keeps society intact, hit like. And if you believe silence protects the wrong people, share this story so the warning outlives the